in respect to one's speech, one's talk, and the usage of one's tongue. The ulama have mentioned that there are 4 different types of speech that leaves a person's tongue. 1, naf'un mahdun, that the speech that comes out is pure good. There is only good in that. Number 2, dararun mahdun, the speech that comes out is completely harmful. Number 3, al-kalamu fihi dararun wa naf'un, that speech that consists of both benefit and harm. And number 4, al-kalamu laysa fihi dararun wa la naf'un, that speech in which there is no harm yet no benefit. So speech that is pure benefit, speech that is completely harmful, speech that is a mixture of benefit and harm, and speech that has no benefit and no harm. When I mean benefit, we're talking about ukhrawi benefit, benefit in the hereafter. When we're talking about harm, we're talking about harm in terms of one's spirituality and the hereafter. So the ulama, they say that other than the first, other than kalam in which there is only benefit, one shouldn't engage in any other type of kalam. The speech in which there is only harm, very obvious why we shouldn't engage in that. Talk in which there is harm and benefit, the ulama, they say the harm outweighs the benefit. If there is harm and nuqsan, again, if there is nuqsan to your akhirah, then you forgo the small benefit that's there. And kalamun, that speech which is permissible, in which there is no harm and no benefit, the ulama, they say that why waste your time in something that's not productive for the akhirah? Why waste time in kalam that's not going to be productive for the akhirah? And that kalam is known as ma la ya'ni, speech in which there is no true direction in that speech. There's no reason for it. And this is the kalam of the aslaf, the salaf al-salihin. This is how they approached talk. They wouldn't engage in small talk. They wouldn't engage in talk simply to pass time. It was never their demeanor. This wasn't how they approached life. They considered waqt, time, extremely, extremely valuable. The way that they approached time was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, wal asr, Allah has sworn oath by time. Why has He taken a qasam upon time? Because of its importance. Of the things in this world that passed by you but you can never retain again is waqt. It's not philosophical, it's a very straightforward understanding that once time passes by, whether it's a minute, whether it's a week, whether it's a month, whether it's a year, whether it's a decade, whether it's a century, passes by, you don't get that time back. You cannot recoup a second of your life. And so the aslaf, they approached taking up time with something that wasn't productive, a waste of time. Engaging in something that wasn't productive for their akhirah, for them, was a waste of time. It wasn't something that they could spend time on. And what would be in front of them is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that Jannah is a barren land. Jannah is a land that will be gifted to the believers. And their subhanallah and their alhamdulillah and their Allahu Akbar is what will beautify and adorn their paradise. And so for them to engage in something other than what was benefiting them in the akhirah, it didn't make sense. Now, we now live in a time, and we now live in an era where it's not simply wasting time with what we say. Like I said yesterday, in terms of speech, you have to transcend with the time, and you have to make sense of it for ourselves. So ghiba is not just something that you verbalize, ghiba is also something that you send by a text message. Slander is not just something that you do in front of somebody. Slandering someone takes place behind, even through a message that you send to somebody. Ma la ya'ni, what doesn't concern us, is not only in this era speech, but especially for the young ones, the time that we spend on something that is not beneficial for us. Especially when it comes to electronics. Especially when it comes to things like the internet. Especially when it comes to mass information, which is just that, which is of no, at that particular time, it's of no use to us. If you analyze your time on the internet, if you take that up and you sort of make a little analyzation of it, then you'll find that the majority of your time on the internet is spent on things that you didn't actually intend to go on in the first place. The whole concept of a World Wide Web, is that you get caught all over the place. You get caught when a spider spins its web. It's its house, okay, that's where it lives, and secondly, it spins its web to catch its prey. And so you have this massive web, and so an insect at any junction, no matter where it goes, that web, the entirety of that web is there to catch its prey. The internet, the World Wide Web, is exactly the same thing. You get caught in it. I was once with Sheikh Riyadh, and he was about to deliver a lecture, Jummah, and I asked him that, do you use the internet? I asked him, for your studies, I never use the internet. So I said, why? He says, I realized that once I go on to the internet, I end up somewhere I just never intended. It's not even about ending up somewhere wrong. No, I end up somewhere where I never intended in the first place. So even if you go with with a particular intention, such is the nature of the web, and we've become so engrossed in concerning ourselves with affairs that are they don't actually mean anything to us at that time. They have no value in terms of our time, but we'll end up there. We'll spend not minutes, hours. We'll spend hours looking through things that we never actually intended to look at. And what do you attain from that after those hours? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is honestly, I'm not saying this as words. The next time you lose focus on the internet, remember what we've spoken about today, and then think back to the 20 minutes that have just passed. Think back along that 30 minutes that have just passed, and think to yourself, what has just happened in those 30 minutes? What type of productive work have I done in that 30 minutes? Now, I mentioned this in the Jummah a couple of times, so it might be repetitive for some. And when I was a teacher at Risala in Tooting, once I had a boy come in the morning, and he was absolutely, completely shattered. You could just tell this person had no sleep. And GCSE years, he was in year 10 or year 11, so I asked him that, why are you in this state? How many hours did you sleep? And begrudgingly he said, I fell asleep about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So I asked him, what were you doing until then? So he said, I don't really know. I said, what do you mean? So he said, I got home, I ate, and then I sat on the internet. And the next time I looked up, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. So I said, what did you do in that time? He goes, I don't know. I can't tell you what I actually did in that 8, 9, 10 hours that I've spent in front of the screen. And that's the nature of the internet. That's the nature of our smartphones. That it occupies you in such a way that you're no longer productive. And that is not the sifat of a believer. The believer is one, like I said, even in speech. The ulama, taruk ma la ya'ni. What doesn't concern the ulama, they're not interested in it. We're spending time on the internet looking at what somebody ate. No, I'm being real here. That people posting a famous person that you may follow on one of the social media accounts, he's showing you what he wore today, what clothing he's wearing today, what he had for breakfast, what she had for breakfast, what they have for lunch, what they have for dinner, and we're looking at that. How unproductive of one's time is that to look at somebody else's meal? To look at what somebody's eating? To follow someone with that level of engrossment that I'm worried about what meal they're eating. That is engaging in ma la ya'ni at an extreme proportionate level. So it might not be in talk that we're engrossed like this. But definitely when it comes to our mobiles, when it comes to the internet, most of us are caught up in this. And the internet is one of the worst inventions of this century. One of the worst things that could have come into existence in the time that we live in. And Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, he mentions that the World Wide Web, it's called the web. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْعَنْكَبُوتِ, that the weakest of houses is the house belonging to the spider. The spider's web is the weakest. It might be there to attract prey and catch prey, but for you and I, how strong is that web? You take a finger and there's no security, there's no safety in it. The internet is exactly the same. There's no security. How many people get hacked? How many people have to call their banks and I didn't make this transaction, I didn't do this, I don't know where this happened, what viruses come through on the internet. And more than that, how many of our young ones are caught up on the internet on things that they're not supposed to be caught up on? How many of us individuals, elderly, are involved on the internet, looking at what we're not supposed to look at? It's an absolute abomination for our iman. I'm not mincing my words here. I'm being very honest here. If you have children, the internet is something that, consider it poison for them. Consider it poison. And more, not even just for our children, even for ourselves. You may be old and you may think that I have control. The internet is poisonous. It's very detrimental. And unless you have tremendous resolve and tremendous self-control, the internet is not a place that you should spend a lot of time on. Even those of us that are very, very careful, how many have had things pop up on your screen that you didn't want to be there? I don't think there's anybody who accesses the internet can say safely that my eyes haven't fallen on something that they shouldn't have fallen on the internet. That is the nature of the internet. And where, like I said, what's the worst bit about this? Is the majority of the time that we're on there, it's on ma la ya'ni, it's on things that we don't need to be on. We don't need to be concerned about. Before, window shopping was something that you had to actually physically go out to do. You had to go to the high street, even to window shop. Now you window shop online. People sit there for hours looking at what they might buy. Or not even what they might buy, what's just on the market. It's not even having to go out to do it anymore. This is how weak the internet is and how unconcerning things we're being involved in. And when it comes to speech, the Sharia is very, very particular. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Tark ma la ya'ni min husni Islam al-mar tarkuhu ma la ya'ni." From the beauty of one's Islam is that they abandon that which doesn't concern them. And so even in speech, the ulama, they say that which is not beneficial, why waste time on it when you can be productive for your akhirah? Similarly for us and this generation, it might not be the speech of the tongue, but the communication that we use in the internet, through the mobiles, it's definitely something that we fall victim to this very disease that the Prophet ﷺ is speaking about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the understanding and the ability to understand that we need to safeguard ourselves from, like I said, this poisonous thing, the internet. In Islam, and I'll conclude with this, where there is manfa'ah and darar, where there is harm and benefit, if you're going to fall victim to the harm, then the benefit is no longer good for you. So many people say that, well, there's so much good on the internet. If you're going to fall victim to the harm on the internet, then that good is no longer good for you. I personally, and this is not a fatwa, I'm not a mufti, but I think for the majority of people, the internet is actually haram. And if there was a fatwa that could be issued, there would be no hesitation in that type of a fatwa. That for most people, the internet, because of their falling into the traps of the sins of the internet is actually haram for most people. That's how detrimental it is. Allah give us all the understanding. Allah give us the ability to understand the seriousness of this threat that's around to our own iman and the iman of our children. وآخر الدعوة الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحان الله بحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.